You probably think you know how much social media is affecting your brain, but you'd be wrong. It's a lot worse than you think it is. But it doesn't need to be. I spent the past few months learning almost everything that there is to know about how social media really affects us and how these companies are almost brainwashing us in order to find a way to use the exact science that they use so effectively just for our benefit. And that started with discovering the secret behind how social media really works. But before you can understand that, you need to understand dopamine. Basically, dopamine is the feel-good chemical in our brain. It manages motivation by giving us a release in dopamine, which signals this feels good, I want more. And when used correctly, it's a positive tool. But Big Mark and the boys prey on this by spiking our dopamine in anticipation that we might see a funny clip or get some validation when we interact with their app. Because dopamine typically spikes in anticipation of a reward, not from the reward itself. So these apps are designed to optimize on that to keep us coming back for these little spikes of dopamine. And because we have these small spikes in dopamine throughout the day, this actually has lasting effects on the rest of our lives. If you've ever noticed that you feel lazy or procrastinate a lot, it's very likely directly tied in with this source of cheap dopamine. Dopamine is supposed to be released when you're doing something productive or meaningful, like working towards a project that you've been putting off or needing a boost of motivation in the gym. But instead, you get that exact same release of dopamine just by sitting on your couch and opening an app, which is way easier to do. So your brain just starts to think, why would I do the hard task when I could just do this easy task to get the exact same feeling that I want? Okay, so causing procrastination and laziness is definitely not good. So we should just quit social media then, right? Not exactly. As somebody who doesn't use social media, there's definitely downsides to quitting social media entirely. It becomes significantly harder to maintain social relationships. You just miss a lot of opportunities in general. There's a good reason why so many people use social media, which is why I set out to actually just find a way to have the benefits of using social media without all the downsides, which I'm going to explain more later. But what we need to understand first is that although dopamine keeps us scrolling once we're using the platform, a simple habit keeps us coming back. If you've ever checked your phone and then opened Instagram and TikTok and scrolled for a few minutes, literally without thinking about it, without even realizing what's happening, that's really just a habit in action. Approximately 40% of our actions are just subconscious habits in action, and habits have a cue, routine, and a reward. Because you have your phone on you at almost all times, when you have a cue of boredom or awkwardness happens, you'll subconsciously grab your phone, open the app, and get that little hit of dopamine. And because people have this habit pattern that causes them to check social media constantly, there has been an explosion of anxiety disorders. For example, the top 3 diagnoses on university campuses are anxiety, depression, and stress, which all can be directly linked to people's social media usage and how society currently operates. So again, why on earth would anybody want to use social media if it just makes them more stressed out, more anxious, and more depressed? Well, because on the other hand, if you don't use social media, you might feel anxious because you're missing out on things or feel out of the loop, which is a big reason why so many people will continue to use it, even if they do find it unhealthy. But if you actually think about that, that just kind of sounds like an addiction, because the literal definition of addiction is a physical or mental dependency on a particular substance or thing and being unable to stop without incurring adverse effects. When I first heard this, I thought, well, this can't be that big of a deal because almost everybody I know uses social media very regularly and technically would be addicted then. Then I thought, wait a minute. Is everybody basically just addicted to social media and it's just normalized for some reason? Think about it like this. Back in the 1940s, everybody was smoking and nobody had a problem with it. And who's to say that social media nowadays isn't very similar to what smoking was back in the 1940s. One cigarette isn't a big deal. Neither is one pack for that matter. The problem is when somebody's become addicted at that point, there's a very real pain associated with quitting, and that pain of quitting is normally significantly greater in the short term than the pain of continuing to smoke. So people just continue to smoke. And in the same way, you might just continue checking Instagram even though you know that you shouldn't. Okay, so we get it. Social media is great for connecting with people, but it's highly addictive, so a lot of people don't quit it even though they know it's bad for them, and makes them more stressed out, less happy, and less motivated. So what do we do about that? So I use the exact science that these companies use to keep us addicted in order to find a way to quit the bad parts of social media without having to quit social media entirely. First off, the most important times when you don't want to be checking your phone is the first thing in the morning and right before bed, because the thoughts that enter your mind first thing in the morning and right before bed can set the tone for how you'll think and feel for the rest of the day, let alone how that impacts your sleep. The downside of this is the time when people tend to check their phone the most. So what we can do is fix the cue in this habit pattern. So rather than charging your phone on your nightstand like most people do, you can charge your phone across the room or in another room entirely. And instead, you can put a notepad or a book next to your bed. This sounds like a small change, but the difference between people with a high level of willpower and those with a low level of willpower is normally just access to temptation. So by priming your environment, you can start to do the productive tasks rather than the destructive task at these important times. But that's also a lot easier said than done when considering that social media is also highly distracting, which can reduce your capacity for concentration and focused work. And there's a big difference between working and doing focused work. For example, when we interrupt our thought patterns, research has shown that it takes us up to 23 minutes to refocus. So that quick check of TikTok or Instagram for a couple minutes could actually be costing you 20 minutes of productive, high quality work. A popular study found that during an 8-hour workday, an average worker only spends about 4 hours a day, or about half their workday, actually doing work. And some studies have shown even less, as low as 2 hours. And when we're doing non-focused work, not only does it take us almost twice as long to complete a task, but the quality of our work also decreases. This applies whether you're studying, working on yourself, or for yourself. How social media keeps us coming back is because it's so easy to access on our phones, which are almost always on us at all times. So in order to resolve this, we can do the opposite of what they essentially want us to do. We want it to make it hard to use social media. So while we're working, we can just delete social media while we work and download it after. This activation energy will stop you from randomly checking your phone and getting distracted. You can also do things like put your phone out of reach when it's time to work. Now, when you have that brief moment of boredom or distraction strikes and you subconsciously reach for your phone, it won't be there. And instead, you can just continue on with your work. The crazy thing about this is if you just make that small change, you can actually get twice as much done than the next person in the same amount of time. Now, just imagine how much more you could do if you had literally double the time to do it. What this means is that you'd be breaking the addiction to social media and just using it as a tool during times when you're relaxing anyway, or when you're just out with friends, but not at these critical times that have the biggest negative impact on you. So you can get the benefit of social connection without the downside of using social media. But that does depend on how you're using social media as well. Depending on what you're looking at on social media, it can have very different effects on you. Like if you're just watching some harmless stand-up comedy clips, it's not going to have much harm unless you're easily offended. But if your feed is just filled up with fake people living fake lives, it can have a negative impact on how you view the world, even if your exposure is limited to a few hours a week. Overall, my solution is just to not have social media on my phone 95% of the time, keep profiles mostly for messaging, and just mute anybody who doesn't align with my values and goals, and focus on people and content that inspire me, or at least just some like harmless entertainment content as well as some educational content that helps me be a better version of myself, just like this channel. So if you like this video, like the video and subscribe if you are new. And if you want to learn how this little pocket journal ended up changing my life and replaced my phone, then check out this video here to learn more.